And welcome back to the SG3 podcast. I'm Shravon, and the name comes from a middle school gym teacher's ability to recognize talent. And tonight, we've got a very special episode here with the former VCU Sports Director at WVCW Radio. He's reported in Montana, but his roots are based here in Virginia. Washington fan Ben Malakoff. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Siobhan.
So let's get down to business. We know what the main story is. Daniel Snyder has hit the road to the tune of $6.05 billion in the selling of the Commanders franchise to Josh Harris and Magic Johnson. However, Snyder is expected to pay a $60 billion fine stemming from the Beth Wilkinson investigation from the NFL. Ben, floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, that $60 million isn't really much to someone who just made, over $6 billion. Something that I thought was pretty funny when it first came out. I mean, he's not even going to notice that money left his bank account. He'll take that fine any day of the week. But, none of that honestly can bring any Washington fans down in this moment as much as Washington fans want to see that guy, fall and fall hard. He's no longer the owner of this, historic franchise, of their favorite franchise. And it's just something to rejoice over, something to give, all of these fans so much hope again. And they can finally start to call themselves fans again. And that's what's making everyone, so happy in DC right now.
You've obviously experienced a lot of heartache since Daniel Snyder has owned the franchise. We're talking about since 1999, if I'm not mistaken, when he first took over. He started off pretty well. He had a playoff victory his first year, but that's only one of two in his entire tenure. He did win a division title under Robert Griffin III's rookie season, but they lost to Seattle in the wild card round. When you see what his tenure ultimately brought in terms of stuff on the field, did you just know that it was destined to fail even without the off the field issues?
I mean, it's really hard to have a successful football team, on the field already, but then just bring in those off the field issues. You see everything that's happening in the off season. You see that's everything that's happening off the field during the football season. It's really hard to focus on the game in that moment. All of these really, really successful franchises in the moment, at this moment, you look at the Chiefs, look at the Eagles, they are franchises that don't have any problems off the field right now, and that really translates to success on the field as well. They can allow themselves to concentrate on their football operations and put together a really, really well-rounded team. Snyder's ability to stick his hands into the football operations while dealing with everything outside of football really screwed everything up. I mean, look at all the bad signings that you can attribute to the Skins and Commanders over these last couple of years because of Dan Snyder. He always really just put them in a place for failure. I think one of the worst signings of all time that I think of when I think of bad free agent signings is Albert Haynesworth. Just over 10 years ago now, maybe. That there's really no explanations for some of the decisions that have been made other than horrible leadership on, but also off the field.
You mentioned the sticking his hands in football operations. Former head coach Jay Gruden has come out and said that his involvement, i.e. Snyder's involvement in terms of drafting, has hindered Washington's management to a point where they cannot be able to draft properly. They can't utilize their scouting department properly. We've talked about this on WVCW Radio during those shows. Jason Bowman, one of our writers who's now doing political reporting, he mentioned Snyder's involvement in drafting was a reason why they felt that there was no chance for the team to move forward despite finding late round talent. When you hear what Gruden had to say, combined with how John Gruden got an involvement with Dan Snyder in terms of calling him fat and then the leaked emails, what do you just think of all of that coming out now as a result of this decision?
Yeah, I mean, Snyder never sat down and watched the tape. He never sat down and he never flew out to high school football games and watched college football games and scouted out players. He wasn't supposed to do that. He's the owner of an NFL team, but he was making decisions to draft players. He was making decisions on big free agent signings. I don't think there's a successful NFL team where their owner is overriding the general manager and the head coaches to make these decisions in the first place. It just doesn't work like that. There are professionals in their field who are supposed to make these decisions for their football teams. And Dan Snyder was doing what he wanted, not in the interest of the players, the coaches, and the fans.
Now that Josh Harris and Magic Johnson are in charge, they've come out and said their goal is to win, but they also want to bring back tradition. They're considering a name change and a complete rebrand. Having spoken to a couple Washington fans, they want to keep the burgundy and gold because they feel there's something wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you cannot bring back the old name, which was the Redskins. We have to say that they were called that. I'm sorry to those who might be offended, but that's exactly what they were called. We won't go any further than that. They're okay with keeping the burgundy and gold, but if you're going to do a complete rebranding of the franchise and the team name that Magic Johnson has come out and said, what would you do? Like, what name would you give them if Commanders is not fit, and how would you rebrand the franchise?
The one thing I really like that the Harris ownership group has said early on here is that while the name change is going to be something they look towards down the road, it's not necessarily a priority. And I think that's where a lot of Washington fans are getting a little bit cloudy in their vision right now, is they're looking at a name change as the next step. No, the next step in for the Commanders shouldn't be a name change, but it should be a culture change. And they should be looking at finally putting a Band-Aid and just actually committing complete or just having complete surgery on this entire football team and operation and righting all the wrongs that have gone on for the past 25 years here. So before we look at a name change, and I'm not saying that I'm opposed to a name change again, I think there needs to be a lot of other things changed first before that change happens.
Now, Magic Johnson getting involved, I mean, now that he's here, he does bring some experience working in a business. However, many would argue he was kind of tied down with the Lakers organization, how Jeannie Buss and Rob Pelinka and them were kind of handicapping him. He now is the ultimate guy. He's mostly in charge with Josh Harris, even though he has a small ownership stake in there. He'll have a lot of say in some way because he knows how to handle big egos. He knows how to talk to people. He knows how to communicate. What do you think Magic Johnson brings to the Washington franchise, becoming one of the very few minority owners in terms of color? Because it's mostly a white crowd with a few different people here and there, like Shad Khan in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's really interesting because I never thought that Magic would be the owner of my favorite football team. I never thought I would have much association with Magic Johnson because I'm not a Lakers fan either. But I think he brings, what Magic represents. People all around the sports world know that Magic Johnson is a good dude. He's a good face. I feel like when you look at him, he's always has a smile on his face. I feel like he just puts a good face on the franchise. He brings a good piece of the culture that we need to start to instill in this franchise. I think he's just a good face and just almost like a poster for what this franchise should look like. I mean, he's a winner. When people think of Magic Johnson, they think of the championships, the awards that he's won as well. I think I think that Magic is someone that Washington fans can finally look up to, especially with someone who is also very experienced as Josh Harris is.
So now that the Snyder era is over, we can celebrate that. And I think I speak on behalf of everybody in the NFL that thank goodness it's gone now. How about a new stadium? Do you think that could primarily go before the name? Like, do you think a new stadium will be in the works? And if so, where would you like it if you had a choice, either in Virginia, Maryland, because it's representing Washington? Because right now the FedEx Field is in Landover, but there have been talks about it potentially coming to Virginia. Would you be opposed to that? And if not, where do you think in Virginia it should be?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of those types of talks. They had a plan for a stadium in Woodbridge a while back, but recently I really have been starting to fall in love with the idea of putting it back up over RFK. It's the Washington Commanders. Why shouldn't they stay in DC? That's where the team should be. And RFK, every Commanders fans knows how historic that site is to the franchise and to the NFL as well. So I think if they knock down that stadium and put something modern over, I mean, it's waiting to be knocked down right now. It's not being used for anything right now. So I think that's the perfect place. And I think now that this new ownership group is in, they have pretty full support to go ahead and get a stadium in almost anywhere they want. And I think DC is going to be the first place that they look.
So you're suggesting that they would build it at the site of where RFK currently stands.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good first choice for them. There's already been a little bit of talk about that, and some DC council people have spoken up that that could be an option.
But are you aware that they won't be? I don't know if they're going to be allowed to use Robert Kennedy's name, because what we see right now with RFK Jr. and his choice of words, we'll put it in those politically correct terms. Do you think that the name RFK could potentially change to something related to DC?
I mean, I don't think they're gonna. I don't think that will have much impact on the former president, who the stadium is named after. Uh, but in terms of a name change, I think that the new ownership group might be looking for a title sponsor, such as it might not be called RFK anymore. It might be called whatever the next version of FedEx Field is, or
Right.
maybe it's just the new FedEx Field in over the RFK Stadium site. I think they want to move out of Landover, Maryland. I don't think they. I don't know if that deal with FedEx is going to stick or if it's gone. But I would not be surprised if there's some giant name brand sticking right over that new stadium who helped put that thing together.
You mentioned culture to start off the show, and yes, that has to be changed. But there are some pieces in place on this roster right now. When you look at the totality, you have Jonathan Allen, you have Terry McLaurin, you have Cameron Curl, one of the up and coming underrated safeties. You have um, somewhat of a young core on your roster. You just drafted this year. You have Sam Howell, who's
Mm-hmm.
likely going to be a starter next season if things go according to plan. What is your take on the
Right.
biggest need on the roster right now? Where do you see this roster at, and what do you think it will take from the new ownership to help put this team in a position where the town can be happy for their fans again?
Yeah, super exciting young roster, like you mentioned. I think we need to increase our linebacker depth on the defensive side. That's been a problem for us the past couple of years. Some people are going to say they're a little iffy about the DBs. I think that our defensive backs are going to really stand out this year with Cam Curl and Dark Forrest and our new draft pick Emmanuel Forbes. I think that interior linebacker core is something that needs to be bolstered up a little bit. I'm excited to see what some of the young guys that we drafted will do, but I think that's our biggest weak point at the moment. I've been saying that if Sam Howell can play as a above a top 15 quarterback, if he can play as one of those top 15 guys in the league, I think this roster can do the rest. I think that we have a strong enough receiving core, running back core, D line, defensive backs to win enough games to make the playoffs and compete for the NFC East here. As long as Sam Howell can show a little bit of maturity, I know he's only played one NFL game, but as long as he can show a little bit of maturity and show that he's capable on the field, I think that the rest of this offense or the rest of this roster can really help carry him to some NFL success.
You mentioned the division. Obviously, the Eagles are not only the reigning division champs, they're the reigning NFC champions. The Giants have had their run to the playoffs just recently. Saquon Barkley's holdout is making a little bit of a headline right now, particularly if you look at the New York Post. And then, of course, there happens to be a team that you're quite familiar with in the Dallas Cowboys. They did win their
Mm-hmm.
first road playoff game last year against Tampa Bay before falling to San Francisco. Little bit of a change right now in Big D, but Washington, if they do their job, there's a chance they could potentially make some noise within the division. I know you're not big into predictions right now, but forget predictions. How do you see this team faring this year, particularly because they have new ownership? Because that tends to be a somewhat of a breath of fresh air for new teams.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the team leaders like Terry and John Allen have like 25 pounds off their backs. They already seem like they're able to move a little lighter from some of their first conversations and interviews. I think people look at the Eagles as one of the best teams in the NFL right now, and rightfully so. They're a very talented team, very well coached. I think that the Eagles will be in most predictions, the favorites to win the NFC East. Other than that, that wild card spot, fighting for 2, 3, and 4 in the division is completely up for grabs. I think the Cowboys, Giants, and Commanders all they're going to be bloodbaths. Those games, I think they're going to be close, and I think those are all really even teams when it comes to what we'll see on those early rosters so far.
So, if I were to ask you on the spot, do you think the Commanders make the playoffs, or how long before you see them getting back into that mix?
My prediction would be in the next 2 years, the Commanders are back competing as a playoff team. Quarterback, but in the next 2 years, I think that the Commanders are easily playoff contenders.
This has been the SG3 podcast. I want to thank Ben Malakoff for coming on here. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And as always, I always keep it real. Do you?